Steve Harvey had watched contestants freeze on this stage. He had watched them choke, go blank, panic, laugh uncontrollably, and give answers so absurd they temporarily broke his ability to process language. But he had never, not once in 20 years, watched someone throw a game on purpose. Not until a Friday afternoon in late March, when a 36-year-old single mother from Pensacola, Florida, stood behind the Family Feud podium and deliberately gave wrong answers to questions she clearly knew. Her family lost. The final score was not close. And when Steve reviewed the tape that evening, something he almost never did, he saw it. The pauses that were a fraction too long, the answers that were a shade too far off, the way her eyes drifted between every question to the other podium. She was not looking at the board, she was looking at someone on the opposing team. Steve called her back to the studio the following morning. He sat across from her in an empty room with the cameras off and asked one question. Why did you lose on purpose? Her answer took 11 minutes. By the end of it, Steve Harvey was sitting perfectly still with his hands folded in his lap and his jaw locked and his eyes full, and he had already decided what he was going to do about it. The taping had been unremarkable through the first 3 games. A smooth Friday session, good audience, clean transitions, Steve in easy form. The crew was hoping to wrap by 5. The 4th matchup was the Simmons family from Pensacola versus the Hollins family from Tallahassee. 2 Florida families, similar energy profiles. The casting notes described both as warm, photogenic, and genuinely excited to be there. The Hollins family came out first. Marguerite Hollins, Maggie as she introduced herself, was 61. A retired social worker with silver-streaked hair and a calm, steady voice that carried across the studio like a hand placed gently on a shoulder. Her daughter Renee, 38. Renee's husband Calvin, Maggie's niece Tamara, and Maggie's younger sister Pearl. Then the Simmons family. Yvette Simmons stood at the center of the podium. 36, lean, tired in a way that was not visible from the audience but was obvious up close. The particular exhaustion of a woman who worked 2 jobs and still checked homework every night and still showed up with her hair done and her chin raised, because showing up correctly was a form of discipline she had fought very hard to learn. Beside her, her sister Danielle, 33, Danielle's husband Marcus, Yvette's co-worker and closest friend Tanya, and Yvette's mother Gloria, 59, in the anchor position. The introductions went smoothly. Steve worked both lines. The audience was warm. The floor manager counted down. Nobody, not the crew, not the producers, not a single person watching, noticed that Yvette Simmons had not looked at Steve Harvey once during the introductions. Her eyes were locked on the woman at the center of the opposing podium. Yvette Simmons had been sober for 7 years, 4 months, and 9 days. She counted, not because she was proud, although she was, but because counting was a discipline, and discipline was the architecture she had built her second life on, one day at a time the way a mason lays bricks. Her first life had ended in a courtroom in Pensacola when she was 28 years old. A judge reviewed the case file. A caseworker read a report. And Yvette sat in a chair beside a court-appointed attorney and listened to a woman she had never met describe, in clinical and measured language, the ways in which she had failed to provide a safe environment for her 2 children. Jalen was 5. Nadia was 2. Yvette did not argue. She could not argue. The report was accurate. The house was not safe. She was not safe. She had been using since Jalen was 3. Pills first, then worse, and the slow collapse of her ability to function had been documented across 11 months of missed welfare checks, 2 emergency room visits, and a neighbor's call to Child Protective Services after finding Nadia alone in the front yard at 7:00 in the morning in January. The children were removed. Yvette was given a reunification plan, treatment, stable housing, employment, regular drug testing, parenting classes. A checklist that looked simple on paper and felt impossible from the inside of an addiction that had eaten her decision-making down to the wiring. Jalen and Nadia were placed in foster care. Their foster mother was a retired social worker named Marguerite Hollins. Maggie lived in a 3-bedroom house in Tallahassee with a fenced backyard and a dog named Biscuit and a kitchen that always smelled like something warm. She had fostered 11 children over 15 years. She was not in it for the stipend. She was in it because she had spent 30 years working inside a system she believed in but understood was imperfect. And fostering was the part of the work she could control. Jalen and Nadia stayed with Maggie for 14 months. During those 14 months, Maggie did things that were not in any handbook and not on any checklist. She braided Nadia's hair every morning the way Yvette had described in the intake form. 2 braids, not 1, with the part on the left side. She read to Jalen at bedtime from a specific book about a bear and a lighthouse that Yvette had listed as his favorite. She sent Yvette photographs, not through the caseworker, not through the system, but directly, mailed in envelopes with a handwritten return address, because Maggie believed that a mother fighting to get her children back deserved to see their faces while she fought. One photograph arrived at the treatment center in Pensacola on a Tuesday in April. A Polaroid. Jalen and Nadia sitting on Maggie's porch steps. Jalen was holding a juice box. Nadia was looking at the camera with an expression that was half confusion and half delight, the face of a 2-year-old who does not understand what a camera is but suspects it might be fun. Yvette held that Polaroid against her chest in a room with cinder block walls and fluorescent lights, and cried for the first time since the courtroom. Not from grief, from decision. The photograph was not a reminder of what she had lost. It was a picture of what was waiting for her on the other side of getting clean. She carried it every day after that. Through treatment. Through the halfway house. Through the apartment she rented with money from a waitressing job. Through the hearing where the judge reviewed her file and said the 4 words she had spent 14 months earning: custody is restored. She got her children back. She moved home. She rebuilt. She never saw Maggie Hollins again. The system did not facilitate reunions between biological parents and foster caregivers. When Yvette regained custody, Maggie's role ended. The case was closed. The file was sealed. There was no forwarding address, no phone number, no mechanism built into the process for a mother to find the woman who had braided her daughter's hair on the correct side for 14 months and kept her son's bedtime story going so he would not lose the thread of his own life. Yvette tried. For years she tried. She searched online. She called the agency. She wrote a letter addressed to Margaret Hollins, Tallahassee, FL, and sent it to 3 different addresses she found in public records. 2 came back undeliverable. The 3rd was never answered. She did not know if Maggie remembered her children. She did not know if Maggie was alive. She carried the Polaroid, and she carried the debt. Not a financial debt, but the deeper kind. The kind that lives in the space between what someone did for you and what you have never been able to say about it, and she accepted that some debts go unpaid because the world does not always build a bridge back to the person you owe. 7 years passed. Yvette worked. She raised Jalen and Nadia. Jalen was 12 now, quiet, tall, a reader who consumed books the way other kids consumed video games. Nadia was 9, loud, fearless, the kind of child who walked into rooms like she owned them and usually convinced everyone she did. They did not remember Maggie. They were too young when the placement happened. Jalen had a faint sense of a house with a dog, but it blurred with other memories, and he could not be sure it was real. Nadia remembered nothing at all. Yvette remembered everything. Danielle submitted the Family Feud application on a whim. Yvette agreed because it sounded fun and because Jalen and Nadia would watch from the audience and she wanted them to see her do something joyful. She did not think about it beyond that. Until she walked into the studio holding area on the morning of the taping and saw, standing 15 feet away beside a craft services table, a 61-year-old woman with silver-streaked hair and a calm, steady voice, and Yvette's entire body went still. She knew her instantly. The face was older, the hair was different, but the voice, that voice, low and measured and warm in a way that made the air around it feel safe, was the same voice that had answered the phone during Yvette's placement calls. The voice that said they're doing fine, Mama, they're doing just fine when Yvette could barely hold the receiver steady. Maggie did not see Yvette. She was talking to her daughter, Renee, reviewing the game format from a printed sheet the production team had handed out. She was laughing about something. She looked comfortable, settled, unhurried, the body language of a woman who had spent a lifetime being steady for other people and had never learned how to be anything else. Yvette stood in the hallway and pressed the Polaroid against her hip. She kept it in her jacket pocket, always the right side, the way she kept her keys and her phone and everything else she could not afford to lose. And she made a decision that no one in her family would understand for another 24 hours. She was going to lose. Not because she was afraid. Not because she could not play. She had watched Family Feud with Jalen and Nadia for years. It was their weeknight ritual, the show they screamed answers at while eating dinner, the one piece of television they agreed on without negotiation. She was going to lose because the woman across the stage was Maggie Hollins, and Maggie Hollins had spent 14 months caring for Yvette's children when Yvette could not care for them herself, and Yvette had spent 7 years carrying a debt she could not repay, and this, right here on this stage, in this game, was the first and possibly the only chance she would ever have to give Maggie something. If the Hollins family won, they would take home the prize. Yvette did not know what Maggie needed the money for. She did not care. She knew only that this woman had given her the most important thing any human being had ever given her, the safe passage of her children through the worst chapter of her life, and Yvette Simmons was not going to stand on the other side of a game show podium and take something from her. The game started. Yvette played wrong. She did it carefully, not obviously. She paused a beat too long before buzzing in. She gave answers that were plausible but slightly off, the kind of answer a nervous contestant might give, the kind that would not raise suspicion from her family or the audience. She let the Hollins family take the lead. Danielle noticed something was off by the second round. She leaned over during a break and whispered, "V, what's wrong? You know these." "Nerves," Yvette said. "I'm fine." She was not fine. She was standing 15 feet from a woman who had changed her life and pretending not to know her, and every wrong answer she gave felt like a small gift she could not wrap or explain. The Hollins family won. The score was decisive. Maggie played fast money with her daughter Renee and scored 212 combined points, well past the threshold. The confetti fell. The Hollins family celebrated. Yvette clapped politely, her jaw tight, the Polaroid pressing against her hip through her jacket pocket. The taping wrapped. Both families were escorted to separate exit corridors. Yvette did not get to speak to Maggie. She walked out of the studio and sat in the rental car in the parking lot and held the Polaroid in both hands and said, quietly to no one, "We're even." They were not even. They would never be even. But Yvette needed to say it anyway. Steve Harvey reviewed the tape that evening. He did this rarely, almost never in fact. Game tapes were the production team's responsibility. But something about the Simmons family's loss had nagged at him during the drive home. The mother had been too calm about losing, her family had been confused, and her eyes, those steady, deliberate eyes, had spent too much of the game pointed at the wrong podium. He watched the tape on his laptop in his hotel room. He watched Yvette's first answer. A 3-second pause before a response she should have known instantly. He watched the second round, where she buzzed in late on 2 questions and gave answers that were adjacent to the correct ones, but never quite right. He watched the way her gaze drifted between every question to the center of the Hollands podium. To Maggie. He called his producer at 9 Double Row that night. "I need the Simmons family back in the studio tomorrow morning," he said, "and I need you to find out if there's a connection between Yvette Simmons and the woman on the other team." Marguerite Hollands. The producer made calls. The casting team pulled files. By 11 p.m. they had enough. Yvette Simmons' children had been placed with Margaret Hollands through the Florida Department of Children and Families. The case was 7 years old. The placement had lasted 14 months. The file was sealed, but the connection was clear. Steve sat on the edge of his hotel bed and pressed both hands against his face and stayed there for a while. The next morning, Yvette was brought back to the studio, not to the stage, to a small conference room behind the production offices. She was alone. No family. No cameras. Just her and Steve and a table and 2 bottles of water that neither of them opened. "I watched the tape," Steve said. Yvette said nothing. "You threw the game." Yvette looked at him. Not with guilt. Not with defiance. With the steady, composed expression of a woman who had made a decision and was prepared to explain it but was not prepared to apologize for it. "Yes," she said. "Why?" And Yvette told him. She told him about the pills, about the courtroom, about the caseworker's report and the judge's voice and the sound Jalen made when they took him out of the house. Not a scream, not a cry, but a single word, "Mama," said in a voice so small and so confused that it had lived inside Yvette's chest for 7 years, like a stone she could not dissolve. She told him about treatment, about the cinder block room and the fluorescent lights, and the 90 days that felt like 900. About the moment she decided to survive, not to recover, not to heal, but to survive. Which was the only word that felt honest at the time. She told him about the Polaroid. She pulled it from her jacket pocket and placed it on the table. Jalen, 5, holding a juice box. Nadia, 2, looking at the camera like it was the most interesting thing she had ever seen. "Maggie took this," Yvette said. "She mailed it to me at the center. Nobody asked her to do that. The system doesn't require it. Most foster parents don't. She sent me 11 photographs in 14 months. She wrote notes on the back, what they ate for dinner, what Jalen said at school, what Nadia laughed at that week. She touched the edge of the Polaroid. She braided my daughter's hair the right way. 2 braids, part on the left. I told the caseworker that during intake and Maggie actually did it. Every morning. For 14 months. Steve was still. I got clean because of this picture," Yvette said. "I got my children back because a woman I had never met treated them like they were hers and then gave them back to me without asking for anything. Not a thank you, not a phone call. Nothing, she just let them go, because that was the job and she believed I could be their mother again." She looked at Steve. "I have been looking for her for 7 years. I never found her. And then I walked into this studio and she was standing by the coffee table, and she didn't recognize me, and I was on the other team, and the game was about to start." Steve's hands were folded on the table. His jaw was tight. "So I lost," Yvette said. "I lost on purpose. Because that woman gave me the most important thing anyone has ever given me, and I have never been able to repay her. And this was the only thing I had. If I couldn't find her, if I couldn't thank her, if I couldn't hand her a check or buy her a house or do anything that matched what she did, then I could at least step aside and let her family win a game show. I could give her that." She paused. "It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's what I had." Steve did not move for a long time. His eyes were full, his breathing was controlled. He was sitting perfectly still the way a man sits when he is recalculating everything he thought he understood about the day before. "Yvette," he finally said, "I need you to come back to the stage." They brought both families back. The Hollins family was confused. The Simmons family was confused. Neither knew why they had been asked to return on a Saturday morning when the studio was dark and the audience seats were empty. Steve stood at center stage. No podium. No cards. No game. Just a man in a blazer standing under work lights with two families arranged on either side of him and a camera crew that had been called in on overtime and told only that Steve had requested a private taping for something that needs to be recorded. "Maggie," Steve said, "do you know who this woman is?" He gestured toward Yvette. Maggie looked at her. She studied her face, the careful, professional scrutiny of a woman who had spent 30 years reading people, and shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry, I don't." Yvette stepped forward. She was holding the Polaroid. "Mrs. Hollins," she said, "my name is Yvette Simmons. 7 years ago, my name was Yvette Delane, and you took care of my children for 14 months while I was in treatment." She held up the Polaroid. "You took this picture. You mailed it to me. You wrote on the back. They had spaghetti for dinner and Jalen said the blessing all by himself." Maggie's hand went to her mouth. "You braided Nadia's hair every morning. 2 braids. Part on the left. You read Jalen the book about the bear and the lighthouse every night. You sent me 11 photographs and you never asked for anything in return." Maggie's knees softened. Renee caught her arm. Pearl stepped closer. "Yesterday, I lost this game on purpose," Yvette said. "I gave wrong answers so your family would win. Because I have spent 7 years trying to find you, trying to thank you, trying to give you something, anything, that matched what you gave me. And yesterday was the first time I was ever in the same room with you again, and the only thing I had to give was a game show." Maggie was crying. Not the careful, composed tears of a woman who had spent a lifetime being steady. Real tears. The kind that come when something you did a long time ago, something you did because it was right, not because anyone would ever notice, comes back to you with a weight you never expected. "I remember them," Maggie whispered. "Jalen and Nadia, I remember every child. But those two," she stopped. She pressed both hands against her chest. "Nadia used to put her shoes on the wrong feet every single morning and refuse to fix them. And Jalen used to say, 'Good morning, Miss Maggie,' in this little serious voice, like he was a tiny businessman arriving at the office." Yvette laughed, a real laugh, wet and broken and wide open. "He still does that," she said. "He's 12 now and he still greets every adult like he's shaking their hand at a board meeting." Steve was standing to the side with his arms folded and his head bowed. When he looked up, his face was streaked and he made no effort to fix it. "Maggie," Steve said, "this woman gave up a game show prize for you. She stood on this stage and lost on purpose because she could not find any other way to say thank you. In 20 years of television, that is the most selfless thing I have ever witnessed." He looked at both families. "So here's what's going to happen. I called my producers last night. Both families are receiving the full prize. Both of you. Because a game that was lost out of love was never really lost at all. The segment was never broadcast as a standard episode. The production team edited it into a special Veterans Week and Family Stories package that aired during the holiday season. The clip, Yvette holding up the Polaroid, Maggie whispering, 'I remember them,' was viewed over 17 million times. Maggie and Yvette exchanged phone numbers on the stage that Saturday morning. Maggie called Yvette the following Tuesday. They talked for over an hour. Maggie asked about Jalen's grades and Nadia's soccer team, and whether Nadia still put her shoes on the wrong feet. She did not. but she still refused to brush her hair before school, and Yvette said, "That one might be permanent." Maggie drove to Pensacola in May. She sat at Yvette's kitchen table and drank coffee and met Jalen, who greeted her at the front door with a handshake and the words "Good morning, Miss Maggie," spoken in the same serious, tiny businessman voice he had used at age 5, now deepened by 7 years and several inches but structurally identical. Maggie cried. Nadia did not remember Maggie's face, but when Maggie knelt down and opened her arms, Nadia walked into them without hesitation. The way a body remembers a shape it was held in before the mind learned how to store the memory. Yvette hung the Polaroid on the refrigerator, not in a frame, just taped to the door with a small magnet shaped like a peach that Danielle had brought back from a gas station in Georgia. It sits beside Jalen's honor roll certificate and Nadia's soccer schedule and a grocery list written in Yvette's handwriting that has been there so long nobody remembers what was on it. The photograph is fading. The edges are soft. Jalen's juice box is barely visible now. But Nadia's face, that half-confused, half-delighted expression of a child encountering a camera for the first time, is still clear. It is the picture that brought a mother back from the worst place she had ever been, and it was taken by a woman who did not know she was saving a life. She was just doing the work, braiding the hair, sending the mail, saying they're doing fine, mama into a phone connected to a cinderblock room 400 miles away. If this story reminded you that the biggest things we do for each other are sometimes the smallest, stay here. This channel has more of them. And they are waiting for you.